We are now thrilled to be joined by head coach of the San Jose Sharks, David Quinn, who is traveling Florida right now with the family dogs. I love it. David, thank you for joining us. How are you?
No problem. Good to be with you guys.
There's a lot to get at with you. And we got you on specifically to talk about Team USA in the World Championships. But I think Sharks fans and NHL fans that maybe weren't watching every game of the Sharks, and maybe they were, we don't know. I think there's a lot of compelling things to talk about in the season that just ended. And you're coming out of exit interviews, and we talk a little bit about the balance that you have of trying to turn the page versus correct mistakes. What was your message to your team and your players specifically? Did you have like a through line when you were talking to the players coming out of the exits?
It's funny, Craig, because the word that just jumps out to all of us, whether it be players, coaches, or management, is frustration. Because through the course of the season, people that did follow us and watch us, we found ways to lose hockey games that I don't think you could really duplicate. And it wasn't just one way. It was a different way every night. It was a different player. And, the level of frustration that kept building throughout the first half of the season was getting difficult to overcome. And, we felt like we were playing pretty good hockey, and our record certainly wasn't indicative, we thought, of the way we were playing. So, when it became clear we weren't going to make the playoffs, obviously Mike made the moves that were beneficial to our organization long term. And obviously the end of the season certainly didn't mirror what we felt the beginning of the season or the first 50, 60 games were. So it was really a tale of two seasons in a lot of ways, but you certainly have to learn from, the season, understand the things that you did well and the things you got to improve on. And that's our job as a staff, and to kind of alter some of the things that we were doing to put ourselves in a position to win more hockey games.
There was definitely, this point of demarcation for you as you talk about finding ways to lose, a lot of like overtime, a lot of, close games for the first half of the season. And then the GM does what the GM has to do there.
Right.
Is your pitch to Mike like, hey, can we take another run at it next year? Or is, he's got these long-term plans, and Erik Karlsson is top of mind, like what he has to do there, versus you saying, hey, we want to improve off of last season. Like, how do you balance that with Mike?
Well, there's a balancing act for every organization, right? Every organization is looking short-term and long-term. That's the job of the general manager. And, unfortunately for us over the last 4 years, we've been paying the price for chasing Stanley Cups for 20 years. That's just the evolution of a franchise and the way things go in pro sports, right? You can constantly trading away assets, you're trading away draft picks, and eventually it's going to catch up to you. And that's kind of what's happened here in San Jose. That being said, we've got a core of, guys in their early 30s that are really good players. And so I don't want to say we're in between, but it's not as clear cut with us as what the next step is. And that's something that, is probably going to take care of itself and unfold here in the next 2 months.
You don't have to look far. Like, look at the Kings. Like, they're probably a good comparable for you all. Where they're sitting here as we sit and talk. They're giving the Oilers all they can handle with this combination of young players and the same guys that they were winning Stanley Cups with.
Well, it's funny, when I took over the Rangers, we were in similar situations. The Kings and the Rangers. We were ahead of the game a little bit when I got to New York, and here both organizations are, the Rangers and the Kings. Legitimate chances to win Stanley Cups, right there, fighting for it. So, there are different ways to do it. It can happen, especially when you have, like you said, I think LA is a pretty good comparable to where the situation we're in. And I've got all the faith in the world in Mike that, we're going to get out of this quickly, but also in a timely, responsible way.
Sorry, Mike, or Sean, I was really hogging the mic here. Go ahead.
We talked about this. We talked about this once already, but like, how is when you do go through the exit meeting process and you kind of assess the way the last chunk of games went, is there like a magic bullet? Is there one thing you can look at with your team and say, like, this is what did us in from an on ice standpoint over the last 6 weeks or 8 weeks? Is there anything that changed?
Well, the last 6 or 8 weeks were almost an outlier in a lot of ways because we made so many changes. We had so many new faces, so many call ups. So, you also got to be realistic to what you're evaluating. And we're probably more focused on the first 60 games than we are the last 20 to get a real feel of what we need to continue to do to be better. And, we did a deep dive about, why are we giving up so many goals? Why are we defensively one of the worst teams in the league? Because if you look at high danger chances and, giving up chances in general, we were in the middle of the pack, even creeping to the top 10 in some of the defensive analytics, and it just didn't match up. And the number one thing was offensive zone turnovers. I think it was almost 38% of our chances against were because of offensive zone turnovers. High risk decisions, not responsible decisions. And that's something that we're going to have to clean up for sure next year. And, while there's some things we can do from a coaching standpoint to put us in a better position that way, absolutely. And we're in the process of doing that now to figure out, what can we do? What can we tweak from a coaching standpoint to put our players in a better position to not, turn the puck over as much as we did in the offensive zone.
How do you figure out a level of risk that you can live with when it comes to coaching an offensive team? Because I'm sure you don't want to coach the creativity and you don't want to coach the offensive, right. the offensive chance taking out of these guys. But at the same time, it was a clear problem for you guys. So how do you 38%
or whatever?
How do you get to that even water mark where you're like, this is the sweet spot for us in terms of risk taking?
Well, I think we had players that probably weren't highly skilled offensive players trying to be highly skilled offensive players.
Right.
There are acceptable turnovers in hockey. You're going to turn the puck over when you're going to be A, when you have high talent, and B, when you're trying to create offense. But there are also players that have to understand what their abilities are, what they're capable of doing, and what they're not. And I think sometimes what can happen is, in our situation where we were not a high scoring team the last 2 or 3 years, and we want to score more goals, everybody thinks, okay, I got to do more. And all of a sudden, you may be doing more offensively, but you're doing a lot less defensively. And it's that balancing act of players understanding, what their abilities are and what their limitations are. And that's part of being an NHLer.
I was just in New York I was at the Islanders Hurricanes game, and it was funny. I was watching Brent Burns make this huge impact in this game, and you can see what happens when a guy like that goes, into a playoff kind of mindset. And it's like, oh yeah, this guy's great. We all remember how good Brent Burns is. And so I know there's probably people watching that going, boy, it would be awesome to see Erik Karlsson in that scenario. I don't know what those discussions with him are like, but do you get the sense from him he's like, I want to be part of this, or I want to be part of winning, or like, what are those conversations with Erik like in terms of his future?
Honestly, Craig, I think he's torn because I think he really enjoys San Jose. I think he likes the direction of our franchise. But he's also going to be 33 years old and he wants to win a Stanley Cup.
Right.
So, he and I have had many conversations about this. I think he's in a little bit of a holding pattern, trying to see what our next move is. And I think he'll make that decision here over the next few months in his conversations with Mike and seeing what's going to happen here in the next leading up to the draft. And obviously the first piece of the puzzle is going to be May 8th when those balls start bouncing all over the place.
That's true. Like he might be like, yeah, I'd love to stick around Connor Bedard or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess one more on Karlsson though. He's obviously, if not the front runner for the Norris, he's certainly one of them. You've talked about his keen, several times over the course of the last month. But I thought something you said about it that was interesting was you're talking about his offensive ability. You said his elite ability is like extra. He's got that extra gear, right? His elite is super elite. And I know there's a lot of people out there with Norris ballots, or a lot of people that track this sort of stuff. The defensive numbers are always going to come. They're an obstacle for people. We can be fair about that. But what is it about Karlsson? Maybe a little bit more specifically that makes him a worthy vote and a guy who should be the top of a whole hell of a lot of ballots here.
Listen, I get the defensive numbers and why that may get people hesitation to vote for him for the Norris Trophy. But I think also people have to realize the team he was on, in particular during the last half of the season, for the guy to get 100 points and he was second last time I checked in 5-on-5 points in the National Hockey League.
That's
on a team that's
overwhelming,
highly gifted and offensive. To me, guys, I'm not saying you don't weigh the defensive side of it. I mean, defense is actually part of your job description. I get it. But this is such a unique year for any defenseman in the history of the National Hockey League. I don't see how he doesn't win the Norris Trophy. I mean, what he did was incredible. And to watch it every day and to watch, you hear all the stories. And when I took the job, he and I had many conversations. I mean, he was so enjoyable to coach, so coachable. Talk to anybody that's been there. I mean, it was a special season in so many ways. And, I'm not saying he can't be better defensively. He and I certainly have had that conversation. We had it at the end of the year. But our circumstances didn't help him. That's for sure. And, you sit together as a staff at the end of the year and you talk about player strength and weaknesses. And all of a sudden he comes up, we're talking about Erik Karlsson. Well, the weakness. Well, defensively, this guy can defend with the best of them. He's got great, ornery, rangy hockey strength. He's got a great stick. He's ultra competitive. And, there was such a burden on him offensively that he suffered defensively for it. That was just the circumstances of our situation.
All right, let's talk Team USA. So we bring this stat up every year when the Americans go to the Worlds. It's been since 1933, David, since they've won gold. I can say we. I'm an American citizen. I'm not on the.
You got the passport.
I'm not on the coaching staff or anything. 1933. So, come on.
Gonna have someday. Hopefully, it's this year. We've been knocking on the door. And our roster's slowly forming. I like the direction of it. It's going to happen. And like I said, we've won some bronzes. Last year, we were playing for the bronze again. We had an incredible game against Finland in the semifinals. Mm-hmm. I don't want to get into it, but we lost 5 defensemen in the tournament. The semifinal game against Finland, we were playing with 3 defensemen, and then Riley Barber and Sam Lafferty were our 4th and 5th defensemen because we lost 5-D.
Everyone loves Sam, but I feel like that's not a position he would want to be in.
My point is, we're going to do it, and I'm banking on this year. That's for sure.
Can you? What's the roster building like? I mean, I know there's always this recruiting that the key is to get a couple players into it and have them do a lot of the recruiting. What is that process like right now?
And I could predict every way a conversation is going to when I call a player.
Yeah.
Hey, how you doing? You want to come to the Worlds? Well, who's going? You're going. Mm-hmm. That's who's going. Now, when you go, we can get other guys to go. Right? That's the number one questions guys ask. And listen, it's a big commitment. It's a lot of time. But rarely do you get to play for your country. And, the great part for American hockey is the depth is increasing every single year. And before they switched over to the NHL guys decided that they weren't going to go to the Olympics last year, I was going to be an assistant coach with the NHL players. And I'll tell you, sitting in those meetings, trying to pick an Olympic team, it is incredible the amount of names that we're leaving off that would be, you'd be saying to yourself, how is that guy not Olympian? And it's getting to the point with American hockey where, if a guy doesn't have a legit reason or a good reason not to come, part of the decision-making process is going to be, okay, Quinn told us no 3 times because he wanted to go on 3 vacations to the World Championships. Well, when it comes time to make a choice, that's going to be part of the decision-making process. And that's where we're at as a country, which I think is going to help us get players to come play in the tournament.
So when you say Quinn, you mean Quinn Hughes, right? That was a clear shot to Quinn Hughes to play this year in the World. He's played. I think he's played in at least one that I remember.
He's played. Yeah.
What do you have do you have a couple dominoes that you're like, we're pretty sure we're getting this guy that help? It always helps to have like Patrick Kane, not in this case, but I remember when your Patrick Kane was in or Dylan Larkin or whatever.
Yeah, we got Guentzle, we got Bonino, we got Tuch. So that's a good start. We got Garland.
That's pretty good.
We got Garland. We're making strides. There are a bunch of guys we had 3 or 4 guys that were coming that unfortunately were injuries. They couldn't come. Matthias Samuelson, Jordan Greenway were coming, and they, after their exit interviews and physicals, unfortunately, they're not able to come, which is unfortunate. So we've got some good building blocks with Casey DeSmith in net, who's a legit NHL goalie. So we're going in the right direction.
What are the calls like whenever you have to track down guys who may have just been eliminated from the playoffs? And I know that those are calls you've had to make before, but is that a difficult Like, how do you finesse that? Like, is it a case by case thing? Like, what do you like? What do you do? Yeah. Sorry. Hey, sorry about last night. Do you want to go to Finland in a couple days?
That is not easy. That's a lot of Dr. Phil and trying to angle around the obvious of playing in front of 20,000 people and the intensity of Stanley Cup hockey, and to be able to kind of reset yourself and come on over and play. And you got to be realistic too. You give a guy a few days, and you want people to want to be there too. So as much as you want to try to recruit somebody, you don't want to talk someone into coming over. You want people that are all in when they're there. And we had Boldy and Hartman and Swayman join us last year after their exits, and they were outstanding. We couldn't ask for more from those guys when they came over.
How about some of the young guys, like the draft eligible, like a Will Smith or some of these? I know sometimes it's hard. You're all of a sudden you go from playing kids to men. Is there a pool of guys this year that you're looking at for those kind of opportunities?
Definitely a pool of guys that you're looking at, the college guys. But again, you're from an NHL, but you want to bring the best players, and
sure.
That's what we're focusing on right now.
All right. Well, I know you got a plane to catch, dogs to kennel, whatever else. A house to build. You're building a house, aren't you, David? Somewhere in Rhode Island right now. You got to oversee some construction.
Building a house in Westerly, Rhode Island. We still got our apartment in New York. We fly JSX Airlines, which allows us to take dogs on the plane. So it's been a curious route back to New York.
I was wondering if the Golden Doodle needed his own seat. That's what I was curious about.
He gets a lot of attention, and he lays in the aisle. That's how great
he knows it. See, he knows it. That's always the way it goes.
Yes, he does.
Rex is a ham. We love it.
Rex is a ham. He's a hit every airline he walks on.
That's amazing. Well, David, best of luck. Safe travels. Thanks for joining us, and we'll have you back on
after we win gold. After we win gold, I'll be back on.
Sounds like a plan.
That's right.